So, is your nutrition advice doing far more harm than it is doing good? That is a question that I started asking myself as I started my master health coaching certification and realized that as much as I appreciated doing let me say this, like, as much as I appreciated going through the Master Health Coaches certification, is that the thing that I realized, let me take a step back. The thing that I realized is how much nuance there is when it comes to nutritional advice. And one of the things that had at a time taken me away from health coaching is the very thing that brought me back. And that's really ensuring that when we have conversations about nutrition, that we're being more mindful and inclusive of the different cultures, the different beliefs, the different dietary preferences that are out there. So that's why I wanted to have this conversation today. Thank you so much for everyone that's joining this live. If you're watching the recording of this, you can always leave a comment below. I'll make sure that I add this so that you can all comment and leave messages if you have any questions or any insights that you want to share with the community. But let me make sure that I properly introduce myself just in case you're new to me. My name is Tanisha Campbell, and I am the founder of Enhanced Black Women's Health, as well as the EBWH Community Newsletter. I am a health writer, I am a health coach, I am an educator, and I'm very passionate about talking about health equity, talking about how can we address health disparities, and specifically thinking about different ways to rethink health. And this is why this conversation came up for me is thinking about when we have conversation about what makes nutrition advice something that can be seen as shaming versus supportive. Oftentimes, where I kind of see the shame happen is where people have these misconceptions about what health is supposed to look like. And if you're someone, who doesn't have, if you're someone who doesn't fit, what the image of what people say health is supposed to look like for me as being a Black woman in a space that is not always very welcoming to us. That's something that I can see. I've also seen as somebody who has been in a larger body at times is also not always a welcoming space. And then just being a woman in general, sometimes not a welcoming space in health. Or the assumption is that you don't have as much experience or you don't have as much knowledge. So I say all that to say is when we think about nutrition advice being shaming, is sometimes people have this conception that healthy eating is supposed to be very bland, have no flavor. It's supposed to be following the Mediterranean diet, and anything that deviates from that is somehow not healthy. And I would notice that when I would have conversations with other individuals, whether they were health coaches, whether they were my friends and family, as soon as I would say, like, oh, I'm studying my, for my nutrition certification, or when I became a health coach, like, oh, I'm a fitness nutrition coach. The assumption was like, oh my goodness, I gotta watch what I eat around Tamisha. And I'd be like, no, you don't have to watch what you eat around me because I don't want you to watch what I'm eating. I want to eat my burgers and fries in peace too. And I always joke like that because I want people to, but it's actually not a joke. I really do like burgers and fries. But I say that to say is that there often would be this fear in this unknown shame, like this internal shame about how you think you're supposed to eat versus how you actually eat. And I will say for some of us who come from very diverse cultures, part of that comes from this idea that our foods are somehow bad foods and everyone else's foods are good, which is interesting because if you look at something like quinoa, which is a staple, which has been a staple in indigenous diets for literally centuries, is now something that is so highly overpriced because of the simple fact it became a superfood a couple of years ago and now everybody wants to eat it. So it's kind of interesting how sometimes our cultural foods end up becoming, which formerly were seen as quote unquote bad foods, are now all of a sudden good. But that's a rant for a different day. What I want to talk about here is like, how can we think about whether we are providers, whether we are clinicians, whether we are educators, or whether we're just the general public, how we can talk about nutrition without emphasizing that people need to give up something and understanding that most of the time it's about addition. Whenever I have worked with clients in the past, I wasn't focused on what can you subtract. So if you don't follow Julie Duffy Dillon, you definitely should. She has an amazing book. Actually, I have it right here. Find Your Food Voice, which is actually a really fantastic book that will help you if you do kind of have many of these struggles when it comes to food. Definitely highly recommend you get the book. But what I was saying is, well, how can we talk about food without asking people to give up their culture? It's understanding how can we ensure that people's cultural foods are part of those meal planning and preparation. Because if we don't do that, it makes it a lot more difficult for people to maintain it. Often, and I actually was just on a webinar earlier where they were talking about why we don't use the term non-compliance anymore is because when you sit there and say non-compliance, that gives the assumption that somehow someone doesn't want to be healthy, or they're not trying to follow the rules or follow your plan or your instructions. But that's often not the case. Often there's different barriers present that make it difficult for people to follow through. And one of those barriers can be when you're telling them to make these drastic dietary changes, and you're telling them to cook food that they've never cooked before, and cook recipes they never cooked, and styles of eating that they've never done. One of my initial clients that I worked with years ago, she told me originally, like, oh, I don't eat vegetables. And at first I kind of thought she just meant she didn't eat like green vegetables, or no, but like I realized as I worked with her, I was like, oh no, she doesn't like eat any vegetables at all. Like that just was something she didn't consume. So a good part of our work had to go with finding which vegetables she felt comfortable with. And guess what? Those started off with canned. It didn't make sense to have her cook a whole bunch of fresh vegetables when she don't make vegetables at all. So we started with a lot of like canned dishes, and just to try to figure out, a little low salt added, but trying to figure out what she actually enjoyed. And from there, we were like, okay, you like this food? Great. We'll try to find more recipes with that. You don't like this one, so we're not even gonna worry about it. But I use this example as like for people when you're asking them to make such drastic changes, but then also asking them to kind of give away parts of their culture, give away foods and styles of eating that they're used to, it can make it very difficult to maintain overall. So I always try to think about how can we add to what people are doing, and how can we let them know this is what you're already doing well. Let's expand upon that. Because that affirmation and that encouragement could also push a person forward. If you're sitting there telling someone that they're doing everything wrong, other than the fact that it's very discouraging, it's also very unlikely that they're going to want to work with you. So, like, I won't want to work with somebody who's telling me that I'm always doing things wrong and I never get it right. So think about ways as providers, whether somebody is following through with thing or not, but how can we encourage them along the way and push them from where they are, not really push them, but encourage them and walk with them from where they are to where they want to go. And then the last thing I want to think about is overall something that I'm trying to be more mindful of in general is thinking about more inclusive nutrition, and how can we, even if that's not part of your culture, because obviously we're not going to be knowledgeable about everybody's culture, but how can we ask questions? How can we do some research and figure out like these are the dietary dishes that someone's used to? When you're having these conversations with them, trying to get that out can be a little difficult too. There's an assumption that there's going to be like judgment based on the foods that they eat. So sometimes it's easier to think about it as you're asking questions, but you're also building that trust along the way. And you're also being open to hearing more about what they're eating, what are the foods that they enjoy, what are the things that their family enjoys, or even sometimes talking back to what are the things you grew up eating, what are some of the favorite meals you had during different holidays and festivals and things like that. Could be very encouraging for people who have this misconception that like, oh, I have to give up these things, or they're bad, or I can't eat them. Whereas for many people, yes, there could be some changes to certain preparation methods, but there can also just be adding extra things to, in addition to what they're already eating, if there is like maybe some nutrient deficiencies there. So I say all that to say, because when we think about our nutrition advice, how can we think about how we can do more good than we do harm, is really understanding that there's no one quote unquote diet that's going to be right for every single person, that people's cultural foods are just perfectly nutrient dense. You don't have to make a whole bunch of additions to them. Many of us have very basic nutrient dense meals and nutrient dense dishes, and sometimes there is different preparation methods, but also something I almost forgot to mention is thinking about accessibility and affordability, and understanding that if someone has to lean toward canned foods, or they have to lean toward frozen foods because that's what they can afford, let them know that that's perfectly fine. They can still get the same great nutrients from their canned and frozen dishes that they would get from quote unquote organic or wild caught and grass fed and the rest of that stuff, because that's not always going to be within people's budgets. That's not always going to be within people's access, right? There may just be people who live in, unfortunately, food deserts. Food apartheid is also a thing that is very common in certain parts of the world, including the United States. So when we think about that, we want people to feel encouraged, not discouraged when they're thinking about it. Because if it becomes an all or nothing way of thinking, people will sometimes choose nothing. They will sometimes say, well, this is too hard, or this is too difficult, or I can't do it perfect, so I shouldn't even try. Whereas I would rather somebody feel comfortable to say yes. You're going to slowly move from fast food to incorporating more foods at home that you're cooking, but also don't demonize the fast food, because maybe there's a reason that's legitimate that you're eating this. Maybe this is the only thing you have access to. Maybe this is the thing that you can afford. Guess what? have people start where they are and then help them find different ways and different routes versus telling them that the things that they're doing is bad or the things that they're doing is not, healthy for them because that's just going to be the most discouraging way to get someone toward health. You know what I mean? So there was a lot there, but and hopefully in the next couple of weeks it will be a little bit more clear when I speak about it. But one of the things that I just want to walk away with is this is part of why, as I'm going through my Master Health Coaching certification, and I'm just going to start sharing different things that I'm learning and growing in my own skill set, is understanding how we can make our nutrition advice more inclusive. And I'll be talking a little bit more about that in the coming weeks. I have a free masterclass that I'll be doing. You can sign up today, enhancedblackwomen'shealth.com/masterclass. And I'm really, really encouraged to share some things, some insights that I've gained over the years, some insights that I'm learning now too, working with other healthcare providers and understanding how can we ensure that we are being inclusive in the way that we talk about nutrition so that everybody feels welcome, everybody feels like they're part of this conversation, and then everyone's culture is recognized and people get to enjoy the dishes that they grew up eating. And there's nothing wrong with them because guess what? They are nutrient dense too. But that's a different conversation for a different day. Thank you so much, Julie, for watching this live. Anyone that's watching the recording, I'll make sure I save this so that I can add some extra notes and a great reminder. Last thing, if you haven't gotten Julie's book, make sure you get it because it's really great. Find Your Food Voice. So just a little shout out to Julie because that's a really good book. But thanks so much. Like I said, enhancedblackwomanshealth.com/masterclass. If you want to sign up for the free masterclass, it's going to be June 9th at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I was like, maybe I should tell people when it is, but there will be a recording of it too. So, regardless if you watch it live or the recording, you can sign up. So, thanks so much. Have a great one. Bye.